Hi guys, sorry about not posting a video last weekend. I caught a cold and I lost my voice. I'm not really back to 100% yet, but let's see if I can't make it through this video. Now with that out of the way, it's been a pretty action-packed couple of weeks, and by action-packed of course I mean there's been a lot of sanding. Lots and lots of sanding. In this video I'll show you the progress I've made, a couple of interesting products, some Formica samples, and also a very exciting update on the portlights. And of course we'll also take a look at the moisture levels in the hull. That's a lot of stuff to cover, so let's get busy. Let's start out by taking a look at the moisture levels in the hull. Now for anyone new to my channel, I'm waiting for the hull to dry out before I can proceed to the next step in my DIY osmosis treatment. Osmosis is also known as boat pucks, blistering, and a long list of other names. Long story short, my boat had thousands of tiny blisters, primarily in between the barrier coat and the hull, but also some delamination. Now before I can move on to the next step, like I mentioned, the hull needs to dry out, and to track that I'm using this non-destructive moisture meter. I've entered all of the measurements from the moisture meter into a spreadsheet to help me track the progress, and the good news is that the average of all the measurements have dropped from 77.96 to 75.63 over the course of 2 weeks. So yeah, drying out the hull certainly isn't a sprint. I wouldn't even say it's a marathon. It's more like a circumnavigation. I've spoken to the experts I've referred to in some of the earlier videos, and they weren't really surprised that the hull is drying out as slowly as it is, given the summer that we're having here in Denmark. Now according to the experts, if I just leave the boat outside during the winter, the hull will have dried out by next spring or early summer. So given the low cost of being up on the hard, I think that's what I'm going to do. I don't want to throw a lot of money at this problem when it can basically solve itself by just waiting 6 months and doing nothing. Also, if you think about it, it's kind of the very definition of a first world problem. There were some comments on my last video suggesting that I should section off an area of the hull to see if washing the hull has any kind of effect, and I'll try doing that over the coming weeks. Small experiments like that keeps it kind of fun, and who knows, perhaps we'll learn something interesting. Let's head up and take a look at the galley. I don't know if you'll be able to tell on camera, but I've actually made some decent progress. That is in no small part thanks to my parents. They've driven down and lent a hand with all the sanding. And basically the last 2 weekends have been like trying to scratch the world's largest lottery scratch ticket. But as you can hopefully see on camera, all I need to do now is to go over everything one more time with a super light sanding, and then I'll be ready to start varnishing. Overall, I'm close to being done with sanding, at least in here in the main cabin. There's still some detail work to be done, some tiny nooks and crannies that requires a little bit more attention, but overall I'm close to being done with sanding. Now hopefully at some point during the next week I can start applying varnish to the trim pieces, and once the last coat of varnish has been applied to the trim pieces, I can then move on to the portlights. But we'll get back to the portlights in just a few moments. In the last video I introduced you guys to my new best friend, this scraper. In the hopes of speeding up the progress, I went out and I found him a girlfriend. And they're a really cute couple, right? Sadly, this guy couldn't keep it in his pants, so now I have to deal with their illegitimate love child. Oh, shame on you, bad scraper, bad scraper. These two must be pretty closely related, because if you look at the fruit of their loins, you can see some clear signs of inbreeding. Just look at this horribly deformed blade here. Luckily, there's almost always a silver lining, and it turns out this little rascal is pretty good at getting into tight corners. As you can see here behind me, I still need to get rid of some of the silicone that was used to adhere the splash guard to the plywood. Getting rid of silicone can be quite an annoying task, but another one of my favorite tools is a big help when it comes to removing silicone, and that's this oscillating multi-tool. With the bulk of the silicone now removed, it's going to be a lot easier to sand the surface. And just like that, the surface is basically ready for paint. Now you do need to be a little bit careful when using something like this on a soft surface like for instance plywood, because this guy tends to want to dig in a little bit. But this is by far the easiest way I've found so far of removing silicone from plywood. In the last video I mentioned that I'd ordered some Formica samples, and well, these are those samples. I am by no stretch of the imagination creative when it comes to picking colors, but still I decided to get a few different ones. This white one, this other white one, and then this white one, and supposedly these are 3 different colors of white, and I can't even tell them apart. Then we've got 3 colors of grey here, and I can hardly tell them apart. And then we've got the wild creative one, which is this blue one. When I line the samples up like this, I can tell the grey ones apart, but the white ones? Nah. Me being me, I'm in all likelihood gonna stick with one of the boring white ones. The countertop here in the galley will be covered with whatever color of Formica I choose, and that's also the case for this area here where the stove sits. And this bulkhead over here and the area behind the countertop here, that's gonna be the same white color as I've used aboard Obelix. I'd love to hear what you guys think, and if you're good with colors, don't be afraid to suggest something completely different. Now, I'll most likely be too much of a chicken shit to act on it, but still, creative suggestions are very much welcomed. I've included a link in the description for Formica's website where you can see what colors are available. So if you've got a suggestion, please go ahead and leave it as a comment down below. One thing is certain, no matter what color I end up choosing, it's gonna be a big improvement over the old laminate. Let's switch topics. I've received quite a few messages, emails and comments suggesting that my idea of putting the reflex stove right next to the fridge might not be the best idea ever. But given the layout of this cabin, I think that that is actually the best possible location for the stove, and I'm not overly concerned that it will interfere with the fridge, and I'll tell you why. Let's pretend that this thing is the reflex stove, and this is actually to scale. Over here is where the fridge will go, and the stove will go here, and as you can see, there's not a lot of distance there. But for me to comply with safety regulations, I need to keep a set distance from the stove to any flammable material like the plywood that goes over here or this bulkhead here. Now, not only that, there needs to be a sheet of stainless steel in between the stove and the flammable material, and there needs to be an air gap in between the stainless steel and the flammable material. That is the exact same setup I've got aboard Obelix, and a few months ago when I was trying to figure out where to put the reflex stove here aboard Athena, I did some tests aboard Obelix. The footage you see here was shot with my thermal imaging camera, and please note the sheet of stainless steel on the bulkhead behind the stove. And as you can see, the stove gets quite hot, and also the cabin top roof gets quite hot. The ambient temperature inside the boat was just shy of 27 degrees Celsius while I did this test. And now for the interesting bit. This is the back of the bulkhead where the reflex stove is mounted, and as you can see, the area that's shielded by the stainless steel is much cooler than the surrounding areas. It's basically the same temperature as the ambient temperature. Add to that the fact that the hull behind the fridge won't be insulated. Fiberglass has got a pretty low R value. Much of the area in there is below the waterline, and water of course is excellent at conducting heat, and I'll only ever be running the stove when it's really cold outside. I don't think placing the reflex stove here that close to the fridge is going to cause any kind of real issues. Of course, I might very well be mistaken, and if that turns out to be the case, I can always add more reflective material later on, or more insulation, only maybe not expanding foam. As I mentioned, given the layout of this cabin here, I think this is the best possible location for the reflex stove, and I don't want to move the fridge either, because I don't have standing headroom in here, and if I move the fridge to the other side of the galley, I'll lose premium countertop space with standing headroom, and also I won't be able to access the awesome storage that's underneath the countertop. Before we move on to the next topic, I want to mention that I've also started playing around with the size and the shape of the fridge, and that is a whole nother can of worms. But we'll get back to that in the next video. Moving on, I'm very excited to tell you about this next topic. The portlights here aboard Athena aren't really in the best of conditions. The frames are kind of corroded, and also the perspex has tons of cracks and is kind of hazed over. I was planning on trying to refurbish the old portlights, but then I had a chat with the company that made the original portlights for the Warrior 38 and Warrior 40. Or that's to say, the company that bought the company that originally made the portlights for the Warrior 38 and 40. But long story short, they still have the templates for the portlights and are able to make new portlights that look just like the old ones. And that's really fortunate, because that means I don't need to replace all the portlights. For instance, take these two kind of odd looking portlights in the aft cabins. They're perfectly fine and don't need to be replaced. Now these are made with toughened glass instead of perspex, so they're not cracked and they're not hazed over. I've placed an order for 7 new portlights, all of them with toughened glass instead of perspex. Now there is one exception to that, and that's the middle forward port light, which needs to be perspex so that it can bend to match the curvature of the cabin top. And the new port lights should arrive within 5 or 6 weeks. If you own a Warrior 38 or a 40 and are looking for more information about the port lights, then head over to the Warrior 38 and 40 Facebook group I've created. I hope that can become a place for all of us Warrior owners to share information. There's a link down in the description. Before heading back to Obelix to show you the 2 exciting products I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I want to give you a quick teaser for some upcoming content, and it's all inside this box. Ta-da! I'm gonna be replacing all the hoses aboard Athena, including the pressure water system, and this is the stuff I'm gonna use. I think this is gonna be the replacement for the old locks on the lockers in the galley. Last but not least, this is a sample of what is in all likelihood gonna be the new LED lights here aboard Athena, and these lights are gonna be used with this pulse width modulating dimmer. Oh. That is going to look really nice. Of course, I'll have to test this to see how the light looks on camera, because it would really suck to have light in here that doesn't look good on camera. But that is a story for another day. For now, let's head back to Obelix to take a look at those 2 potentially very cool products. Before heading back to Obelix, I got in some more sanding. I've also taken Jökull for a walk, and right now he's relaxing in the cockpit with a treat. I've also done a rough edit of today's video. All I need to do now is to shoot an ending before I lose the last of the light. So these are the 2 products I mentioned. This is the Seabung and this is the iKommunicate. I do plan on shooting dedicated videos about each of these, so this is just going to be a quick teaser. To sum up the iKommunicate, it's an NMEA to Signal K gateway. That means you can hook up this box, or well, what's inside of this box, to your NMEA network. This will then provide a Wi-Fi network where all of your NMEA data is available. Depending on what sensors you've got in your network, that could be anything from temperature to wind data to engine diagnostics. And with a box like this, it gets a lot easier for a software developer like me to access the NMEA data, and the possibilities are basically endless. So maybe imagine all the cool data logging you could do with something like this, or visualizing some NMEA data on a bulkhead mounted tablet. This is most definitely going to be its own separate series of videos. The Seabung is a completely different product. With this you might be able to save yourself the expense of going up on the hard, something I've come to understand is quite expensive at certain parts of the world. The way this works is quite simple. You simply shove one of these red things through your seacock, and then you'll be able to remove the valve to either replace it or to service it. I'm very much looking forward to testing this, but unfortunately the seacocks here aboard Obelix are located in such a way that filming it would be impossible. But I think I've come up with an alternative way of testing these and a few kind of similar products. But all of this is also going to be a story for another day. I'd like to thank long-time subscriber Norman B for sending me a link to this product. I'd also like to thank the manufacturer of the Seabung for sending me this product free of charge. And who knows, perhaps this could become kind of a regular thing on this channel. Something along the lines of, if you guys see a cool product, go ahead and send me a link to it. If I like the product, I could contact the manufacturer to see if they would like to lend me a sample to do a review. I'm very much looking forward to taking a closer look at both of these products. Once I've replaced the port lights aboard Athena and installed the reflex stove, the pressure's gonna be off, so it might take a while before you see these reviews, but they are coming. Okay guys, that is gonna be it for this video. See you! Jökull and I hope you've enjoyed this video. For more videos like it, click subscribe. Please consider leaving a comment and a thumbs up. It really helps me a lot and I appreciate your support very much. If you're new to the channel, please check out the introduction playlist. If you want to watch every single video I've ever published, check out the playlist named All Videos. It contains every single video listed in chronological order.